The wind in the Teton Range doesn't just blow, it screams. It carries the secrets of dead men and the regrets of the living. When Silas Halloway opened his cabin door that night, he wasn't looking for company. He was looking for the wolf that had been stalking his livestock. Instead, he found two women, shivering, blue-lipped, and half buried in the snow. They begged for salvation. They begged for a husband's protection. But Silas looked them dead in the eye, his hand steady on his Winchester, and delivered the lie that had kept him alive for 20 years. I never had a wife. He didn't know that by dawn. That lie would be the only thing standing between them and a shallow grave. This is the story of the lonely mountain man. The winter of 1888 was not merely a season. It was a verdict. In the high country of the Montana Territory, near the jagged spine of the Bitterroot Range, the snow didn't fall. It drove horizontally, like white iron filings meant to scour the earth clean of human arrogance. Silas Halloway sat in the gloom of his cabin, the only light coming from the belly of a cast-iron pot-belly stove that ticked and groaned as the wind battered the chimney. Silas was 45 years old, though the mountain had carved lines into his face that suggested 60. He was a man composed of hard angles and silence. His beard was a thicket of iron gray and black, hiding a jaw that had been broken once in a saloon in Deadwood and set crooked. He was oiling his rifle. It was a ritual, a prayer to the only God he trusted, a Winchester Model 1876. Thump. Silas froze. His thumb hovered over the lever action. The wind howled, a banshee scream that usually drowned out everything, but Silas knew the difference between the sound of nature and the sound of desperation. Thump. Thump. It was a fist against the heavy oak planks of his door. No rider came this high up the pass in November, not unless they were lost or crazy. Silas stood up, his joints popping, and moved with the silent grace of a predatory cat. He didn't ask, "Who's there?" He simply racked the slide of the rifle, the mechanical clack-clack distinct and lethal. He threw the bolt and kicked the door open. The wind violently invaded the room, extinguishing the oil lamp on the table and sending snow swirling into the warmth. Silas narrowed his eyes against the stinging ice. There, collapsed on his porch, were two shapes. They looked like bundles of rags discarded by a beggar. "Help!" a voice croaked. It was faint, brittle as dry leaves. "Please." Silas looked down. The larger bundle moved, shielding the smaller one. A face turned up to him, wrapped in a woolen shawl so frozen it looked like armor. The eyes were green, terrified, and desperate. "We have nowhere," the woman gasped. "The wagon, the wheel broke. Miles back." Silas didn't move to help them. He stood in the doorframe, a giant blocking the heat. "This ain't a hotel, ma'am, and I ain't a Samaritan. We are freezing to death," the woman screamed, a burst of hysterical energy cutting through the cold. She grabbed the leg of his trousers. "My sister, she's not moving. Please. We are widows, abandoned. We have no husbands to save us." Silas looked at the second figure. She was small, motionless. The snow was already piling up on her back. If he closed the door now, they would be dead in 20 minutes. If he let them in, his solitude, the fortress he had built for 2 decades, would be breached. He looked at the green-eyed woman. "Widows," he repeated, the word tasting like ash. "Yes, please, just for the night." Silas stared at the horizon where the storm was swallowing the world. He thought of the grave marked with a simple river stone behind the cabin, buried under 4 feet of drift. "I never had a wife," Silas said, his voice a low rumble that competed with the thunder. "I don't know the first thing about caring for womenfolk. You come in here, you survive on your own. I ain't nursing you." The woman nodded frantically, tears freezing on her cheeks. "Yes, yes, thank you." Silas stepped back, lowering the barrel of the Winchester. "Then drag her in, before you let all the heat out." He watched as the woman, possessed by adrenaline, hauled the unconscious body of the younger one across the threshold. They spilled onto the rough pine floorboards, a heap of wet wool and exhaustion. Silas kicked the door shut and threw the heavy iron bolt. The silence returned, heavy and thick, broken only by the ragged breathing of the intruders. He lit the lamp again. The light flared, revealing his guests properly for the first time. The one who had spoken was perhaps 30. She was striking, even in her disarray, with dark hair plastered to her head and hands that looked raw and bloody from the cold. The younger one, the one unconscious, looked barely 20. Her skin was the color of skimmed milk. Silas retreated to his armchair, placing the rifle across his lap. He didn't offer a blanket. He didn't offer soup. He just watched. "The stove is there," Silas said, pointing with his chin. "Get her warm. If she has frostbite, don't put her too close or the skin will rot." The older woman glared at him, a flash of fire in those green eyes that surprised him. "You have a name, sir?" "Holloway. I am Clara. This is Mary Ann." Clara began stripping the frozen outer layers off the younger girl. "We were traveling to Oregon. Our guide, he took our money and the horses 2 nights ago, left us with the wagon. Oregon is 1,000 miles that way." Silas lied, though it was far enough to be true. "You're lost, Clara. We are alive," she snapped, rubbing Mary Ann's hands vigorously. Silas reached into his pocket and pulled out a pouch of tobacco. He began to roll a cigarette, his eyes never leaving them. He noticed something then. As Clara moved, her wet coat fell open. Beneath the simple calico dress, just above the collarbone, was a bruise. It was purple and yellow, the distinct shape of a thumbprint. He looked at her hands. No wedding ring. He looked at Mary Ann's hand as it flopped onto the floor, a pale band of skin where a ring had recently been, but was no longer. Abandoned widows, Silas thought, or runaways. "Water," Clara demanded, looking up. "She needs water." Silas exhaled a plume of smoke. "Bucket's by the door. Dipper is tin." Clara scrambled to the bucket, her movements stiff. She brought the dipper to Mary Ann's lips. The younger girl coughed, sputtering, her eyes fluttering open. They were blue, hazy, and confused. "Clara?" she whispered. "I'm here. We're safe. We're inside. Where?" "A cabin. A kind man let us in." Clara said it loudly, looking at Silas, daring him to contradict the description. Silas snorted. "Don't get comfortable. Storm breaks in 2 days, maybe 3. Then you go." "I got no supplies for 3 mouths." "We can work," Clara said, her voice firming up. "We can cook. Clean. I like my dirt right where it is," Silas said. "And I cook for myself." He stood up, towering over them. The small cabin suddenly felt very crowded. He walked to the corner and grabbed a pile of cured bear hides. He tossed them onto the floor near the stove, but not too close. "Sleep there. Don't touch my things. Don't ask questions. And if you hear anything outside tonight, wolves, wind, or the devil himself, you don't open that door. Understand?" Clara pulled the furs over Mary Ann, her eyes locked on Silas. "We understand, Mr. Holloway." Silas blew out the lamp, plunging the room into the orange twilight of the stove's embers. He sat back in his chair, the rifle still in his lap. He wouldn't sleep tonight. He knew the look of trouble, and it had just walked through his front door. Morning arrived, not with sunlight, but with a gray, diffused luminescence that signaled the storm was far from over. The snow was piled halfway up the single window of the cabin. Silas was already awake. Or rather, he had stopped pretending to doze when Clara stirred. He was at the small wooden counter, slicing salt pork with a knife that looked sharp enough to shave with. He watched her from the corner of his eye. She woke with a start, gasping, her hand instantly going to her throat, as if checking for a necklace that wasn't there. Then she remembered where she was. Her eyes darted to Mary Ann, who was still sleeping soundly under the bearskins, her breathing deep and rhythmic. Clara sat up, pushing her hair back. She looked around the cabin in the daylight. It was a masculine space, utilitarian and sparse. A rack of antlers held drying herbs. A shelf contained a few battered books and a jar of bullets. But there was something else, a cleanliness to the organization that spoke of military discipline. Or perhaps a woman's lingering influence from long ago. "Coffee's hot," Silas grunted, not turning around. Clara stood, her joints cracking. She smoothed her wrinkled dress. "Thank you." She walked to the stove, conscious of his eyes on her back. She poured a cup of the black sludge he called coffee. It was bitter and thick, but it was hot. "How is she?" Silas asked, nodding toward the sleeping girl. "Exhausted. But no fever," Clara said. She took a sip, grimacing slightly. "Mr. Holloway, I realize we are an intrusion, but we have money. We can pay for the food. Silas turned then, knife in his hand, glinting. Money is paper up here, Clara. Can't eat paper. Can't burn it for long. He dropped the pork into a skillet, the grease hissing violently. You said you were widows, Clara stiffened. Yes, my husband died of dysentery on the trail. Marianne's, he was taken by a river crossing. Bad luck, Silas said dryly, to lose 2 men in one trip. The West is a hard place. It is, Silas agreed. Harder on liars. Clara set the cup down with a sharp clink. I am not a liar, Mr. Holloway. You got a bruise on your neck, Clara, shaped like a man's hand. Dysentery don't choke a woman before it kills her husband. Clara's hand flew to her collar again, flushing crimson. She said nothing. The silence stretched, filled only by the popping grease. I don't care what you're running from, Silas said, turning back to the skillet. Whatever it is, it's down the mountain. Up here, it's just the cold you gotta worry about. But don't treat me like a fool in my own house. Marianne stirred then, groaning. Clara rushed to her side, effectively ending the interrogation. The day passed in a tense, claustrophobic rhythm. The storm raged outside, rattling the roof shingles. Inside, the dynamic was a delicate dance. Silas expected them to be useless, high society women who would faint at the sight of blood. He was proven wrong by noon. When he went to fetch firewood from the lean-to, he returned to find Clara had swept the floor using a bundle of twigs she'd found. She had taken the meager supplies he'd left out, flour, lard, and water, and made biscuits. They weren't pretty, but they smelled like heaven compared to his usual hardtack. Marianne, though weak, sat by the fire mending a tear in her skirt with a needle she had produced from her pocket. Eat, Clara said, placing a plate of biscuits and pork on the table. Silas sat. He took a bite. It was good. Better than good. It tasted like a memory he had tried to scrub out of his brain. You cook well, he mumbled. My father owned a bakery in St. Louis, Clara said softly, before I married. And you? Silas looked at Marianne. The girl looked up, her eyes wide. She seemed softer than Clara, more fragile. I play the piano, and I paint, Silas scoffed. Useful skills for a blizzard. She kept us alive, Clara interjected fiercely. She spotted the smoke from your chimney when I had given up. Don't mock her. Silas held up a hand. Just saying. Piano won't stop a grizzly. Later that afternoon, Silas sat cleaning his revolver. Clara was looking at the bookshelf. She pulled out a small, leather-bound volume. Poetry? She asked, surprised. Tennyson? Silas snatched the book from her hand, moving faster than a man of his size should be able to. Don't touch that. The violence of his reaction made Clara stumble back. I'm sorry. I told you. Silas snarled, his eyes dark. Don't touch my things. He placed the book back on the shelf, high up, with a reverence that contradicted his anger. He turned his back to them, breathing heavily. Clara watched him. She saw the way his hand lingered on the spine of the book. She saw the initials embossed in gold on the cover, faded but legible. A.H., A.H., Clara whispered to herself. Silas spun around. What? Nothing, Clara said quickly, but her mind was racing. Holloway. A.H., you said you never had a wife, Clara said, her voice steady despite her fear. I didn't, Silas said. Then who is A.H.? Silas walked over to her. He stopped inches from her face. She could smell tobacco and pine resin and old danger. A ghost, Silas said. And if you know what's good for you, you'll let her rest. He grabbed his coat and hat. Where are you going? Marianne cried out. It's a blizzard! I'd rather face the storm than these questions. Silas growled. He opened the door and disappeared into the whiteout, leaving the two women alone with the warmth, the food, and the mystery of the lonely mountain man. As soon as the door latched, Clara turned to the shelf. Clara, don't, Marianne warned. He's dangerous. He's hiding something, Marianne. Men who hide things are men who can be leveraged. Clara reached up and took down the book. She opened the cover. On the flyleaf, written in a delicate, flowing hand, was an inscription. To my beloved Silas. May these words keep you warm when the mountain tries to freeze your heart. Yours, always. Abigail, 1868. Abigail, Clara whispered. He did have a wife. Or a lover, Marianne said, shivering. Why would he lie? Because Clara closed the book, her mind working through the tactical possibilities. A man who lies about love is a man in pain, and a man in pain will do anything to stop the hurting. We just need to figure out if that makes him our savior or our executioner. Outside, in the howling wind, Silas Halloway chopped wood until his hands blistered, trying to drown out the voice of Abigail that had been silent for 20 years, but was now screaming in his ear because of two strangers with lying eyes. The wind did not abate. If anything, it grew more malicious as night fell on the second day. The cabin, solid as it was, groaned under the assault. Silas had returned from the woodpile frozen to the bone, his beard a mask of ice. He hadn't spoken a word since re-entering. He simply sat by the stove, stripping his rifle down again, cleaning parts that were already spotless. It was a nervous tic, Clara realized. A way to keep his hands busy so they wouldn't wrap around a whiskey bottle, or perhaps around the memories he was trying to keep at bay. The cabin was thick with the smell of wet wool and the rabbit stew Clara had managed to concoct from the dried meat in Silas's larder. The domesticity of it seemed to irritate Silas. Every time Marianne hummed a soft tune while wiping down the table, Silas's jaw would tighten. "Stop that," he finally snapped. Marianne froze, the rag dripping onto the floor. "Stop what? The noise. The humming. It attracts things. Inside a cabin?" Clara challenged, stepping between her sister and the mountain man. "You're being cruel for the sake of it, Mr. Halloway." "I'm being cautious," Silas grunted. "You city women think walls keep the world out. Up here, walls are just suggestions." As if the mountain was listening, a sound cut through the howling wind. It wasn't the thud of snow or the creak of timber. It was a high-pitched, terrified squeal from the lean-to attached to the back of the cabin. Silas was on his feet instantly, the Winchester in his hands before Clara could even blink. The transition from brooding statue to lethal soldier was terrifyingly fast. "The mule," Silas hissed. He moved to the back door, not the front one. He didn't unbolt it. He listened, his ear pressed against the rough wood. Then came a sound that made the hair on Clara's arms stand up, a snarling, wet and vicious, followed by the heavy impact of a body against the logs. "Stay here," Silas commanded. "Bar the door behind me. If I don't come back in 5 minutes, you take the revolver from the table and you shoot anything that tries to come in." "Silas, wait!" Marianne cried. But he was gone. He slipped out into the freezing darkness, disappearing into the storm. Clara rushed to the door, throwing the bolt as instructed. She pressed her back against it, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Get the gun! Marianne! I can't! Get it!" Clara screamed. Outside, the world was a chaotic swirl of white and black. Silas moved by feel, his boots crunching in the deep drifts. He rounded the corner of the cabin toward the lean-to where his mule, Bess, was stabled. The smell hit him first. Musk and blood. In the gloom, illuminated only by the faint reflection of the snow, he saw it. A mountain lion, gaunt with winter hunger, had torn through the heavy canvas covering of the lean-to. It was crouched over the mule, which was kicking and braying in panic. The cat was massive, a tawny shadow of muscle and teeth. Silas didn't hesitate. He couldn't shoot. The risk of hitting Bess was too high in the dark. He reversed his grip on the rifle, holding it by the barrel like a club. He roared, a sound that rivaled the wind, and charged. The cat spun around, surprised by the aggression. It hissed, ears flattened, abandoning the mule to face this new threat. It leaped. Silas swung the rifle stock with all the strength of his 20 years of solitude. Wood met bone with a sickening crack. The cat yowled, twisting in midair, its claws raking down Silas's heavy coat. Silas went down, the snow filling his mouth. The beast was on him, heavy and stinking of raw meat. He felt the hot breath on his face, the razor-sharp claws digging into his shoulder. He jammed his left forearm into the cat's throat, holding the snapping jaws inches from his jugular. With his right hand, he fumbled for the knife at his belt. "Get off!" Silas grunted. He found the handle. He drove the blade upward, once, twice, into the soft underbelly of the predator. The cat convulsed, letting out a gurgling shriek, and collapsed on top of him. Silas shoved the heavy carcass aside and scrambled up, gasping for air. He checked Bess. The mule was bleeding from the flank, but "Easy, girl," he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "Easy." He spent 10 minutes securing the canvas, dragging the dead cat away from the structure, and checking the mule's wounds. Only then did he return to the cabin. He banged on the door. "Open up!" The bolt slid back. Silas stumbled in, bringing a gust of freezing air and the metallic scent of blood. Clara gasped. Silas's coat was shredded at the shoulder. Blood. His own and the lion's. Soaked his sleeve. "You're hurt," Marianne whispered, her face pale. "Scratch," Silas muttered, leaning the rifle against the wall. He moved to the basin, trying to peel the coat off. He winced, a hiss of pain escaping his teeth. "Sit down," Clara ordered. Her voice had changed. The fear was gone, replaced by a steely competence. "I can handle it," Silas growled. "Sit down, you stubborn old fool, or you'll bleed out on your own floorboards." Clara pushed a chair behind his knees. Silas sat, surprised by her strength. He watched as she efficiently cut away the ruined fabric of his shirt. The claws had raked deep into the deltoid muscle. It was ugly, but it wasn't fatal. "Need boiling water and whiskey," Clara said to Marianne. "Now." Marianne moved quickly. Clara took a clean rag, dipped it in the hot water, and began to clean the wound. Silas gritted his teeth, his knuckles white on the armrests, but he didn't make a sound. "You saved the mule," Clara said softly as she worked. "Need the mule for spring," Silas said through clenched teeth. "Can't plow without her. You risked your life for an animal. Animals are loyal. They don't lie." Clara paused, the rag hovering over a deep gash. She looked him in the eye. "You think we're lying to you, Silas. But you don't know what it's like to be hunted." Silas looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the fatigue in her eyes, the terror she was holding back for her sister's sake. He felt the gentle, skilled touch of her hands on his skin, a touch he hadn't felt since Abigail. "Who is hunting you, Clara?" Silas asked quietly. Clara poured whiskey over the wound. Silas hissed, his back arching. She began to bandage it. Not a who, a what? The law. Silas went still. "You're criminals?" "We're survivors," Clara said, tying off the bandage. "Marianne's husband, he wasn't taken by a river. He beat her. Every night. For 3 years. He broke her arm twice. He broke her spirit." She gestured to the young girl, who was watching from the stove, tears silent on her cheeks. "And you?" Silas asked. "My husband was his brother," Clara said, her voice dropping to a whisper. He watched. He laughed. "One night, Marianne's husband went too far. He had a poker from the fire. He was going to kill her. I saw it in his eyes." Clara took a deep breath. "I had a shotgun. I didn't think. I just stopped him. The silence in the cabin was heavier than the snow outside." "And your husband?" Silas asked. "He promised to see us hanged. He said women have no right to defend themselves against their masters. So we ran." Silas looked at the fire. He touched the fresh bandage on his shoulder. He thought about the mountain lion, a predator doing what it was born to do. And he thought about men who acted like predators, hiding behind the law. "The law will come," Silas said. "If not in the storm, then after." "I know," Clara said. "That's why we can't stay. But we have nowhere to go." Silas stood up, testing his arm. It was stiff, but it worked. He walked to the window and looked out at the black night. "I never had a wife," he said again, but this time the words lacked their usual conviction. "But I knew a woman once. She had a spirit like yours. Fierce." He turned back to them. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow, the storm breaks. Then we decide if you live or die." The silence woke them. For 3 days, the wind had been a constant companion, a screaming presence. Now, there was nothing, just a profound, ringing silence. Silas was already up, dressed in a fresh flannel shirt, his injured arm in a makeshift sling. He opened the door. The sunlight was blinding. The world had been transformed into a sculpture of white marble. Drifts swept up to the roof eaves. The sky was a piercing, painful blue. "It's over," Marianne said, squinting against the glare from the bed of furs. "The storm is," Silas said grimly. "The rest is just starting." He spent the morning digging them out. The snow was heavy, wet, and difficult to move. Clara insisted on helping, using a flat piece of wood as a shovel. Silas didn't stop her. He found himself watching her, the way she attacked the snow with grim determination, her breath pluming in the cold air. She was strong, stronger than Abigail had been. Abigail had been delicate, a flower that the mountain air had wilted too quickly. Clara was a weed, tough, resilient, impossible to kill. By noon, the path to the stable was clear. Silas checked on Bess. She was spooked but healing. He climbed up to the ridge behind the cabin, using a pair of snowshoes he had fashioned years ago. From there, he could see the valley floor, miles below. He pulled a brass telescope from his pocket and extended it. He swept the horizon. Nothing. Just white. Wait. He backtracked. There, a tiny smudge of black against the white. Movement. 4 miles down, near the switchbacks. Riders. Silas counted. 1, 2, 5. 5 men on horseback, struggling through the deep powder. They were moving slowly, but they were moving with purpose. They were following the faint depression of the road that led only to one place, his cabin. He collapsed the telescope and scrambled back down the slope. He burst into the cabin. "Pack your things." Clara looked up from the stove. "What? Why? Riders. 5 of them. An hour out." Marianne dropped a plate. It shattered. "Is it them? Is it Henry?" "I don't know who Henry is," Silas said, grabbing his ammo box. "But 5 men don't ride up a mountain after a blizzard for a social call. They're tracking you." Clara's face went white. "Henry, my husband. He's the sheriff of Carbon County." "He has a posse." Silas froze. "You killed a sheriff's brother? And your husband is the sheriff? He's a monster. Silas! He owns the judge, the town, everything." Silas swore, a harsh, guttural sound. "You brought a war to my doorstep, woman." "We didn't know," Clara pleaded. "We just ran." "You can't stay here," Silas said, shoving a sack of dried venison into Clara's hands. "If they find you here, they burn this place down. And me with it." "Where can we go?" Marianne sobbed. "There's nothing but snow!" "There's a cave," Silas said, his mind racing. 2 miles north, past the tree line. The heater vent keeps it warm. You hide there. I'll deal with them. "They'll kill you," Clara said. "They don't know I have you," Silas said. "I'm just a crazy hermit." "They'll ask questions, look around, and leave when they see no wagon." "The wagon!" Clara gasped. "We left it on the trail miles back." "The snow buried it," Silas said. "Deep. Unless they step on it, they won't see it. Now go! Move!" He ushered them out the back door, pointing toward a jagged outcrop of rock. "Stay in the trees. Don't step in the open snow where you leave a trail. Step on rocks, roots." "Go!" Clara hesitated. She looked at Silas, her green eyes searching his face. "Why are you helping us?" "I ain't helping you," Silas lied. "I'm protecting my property. Now get." He watched them scramble up the slope, their skirts hiking up as they climbed. He waited until they disappeared into the pine brake. Then he went back inside. He looked around the cabin. He had to erase them. He grabbed the extra plate Marianne had used and hid it under the floorboards. He took the bear furs they had slept on and tossed them into the corner, messing them up so it looked like a dog's bed. He opened the windows to let the scent of woman, lavender and fear, escape. Then he sat in his chair. He took the Winchester. He checked the load. 7 rounds. He placed the revolver on the table. 6 rounds. He poured himself a cup of coffee and waited. 40 minutes later, the sound of horses snorting reached him. Silas didn't move. He sipped his coffee. Bang! 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 Heavy fists on the door. "Open up! Carbon County Sheriff!" Silas stood slowly. He walked to the door and opened it. 5 men sat on steaming horses. They were heavily armed. Repeaters, revolvers, heavy coats. The man in the lead was big, with a thick black mustache and eyes like flint. He wore a tin star on his chest. This was Henry. "Help you?" Silas asked, leaning against the doorframe. "You're Holloway?" Henry asked. His voice was booming, authoritative. I am. We're looking for 2 women, fugitives, murderers, dangerous. Silas scratched his beard. Women? Up here? In this weather? He chuckled. If they're up here, Sheriff, they're frozen stiff. You're looking for corpses, not fugitives. Henry narrowed his eyes. He leaned forward over his saddle horn. Don't play games with me, Hermit. We found a wagon wheel 3 miles back, sticking out of a drift. They came this way. Lots of folks get lost, Silas said calmly. Don't mean they made it this far. I haven't seen a soul in 3 months. Henry stared at him. He looked past Silas into the cabin. Mind if we take a look? Warm up? I do mind, Silas said. I value my privacy. One of the deputies, a weasel-faced man with a scar on his lip, cocked his rifle. Sheriff asked you a question. Old man. Silas didn't flinch, and I gave an answer. Unless you got a warrant signed by a federal judge, you ain't coming in. Henry smiled. It was a cold, reptile smile. We don't need warrants in the territory, Holloway. We are the law. He swung his leg over the horse and dropped into the snow. The other 4 men followed suit. Silas stepped back, his hand drifting to the Winchester leaning just inside the door. You're making a mistake. We'll see, Henry said, pushing past Silas into the cabin. The men crowded in. They looked around, overturning things, opening cupboards. Henry walked to the stove. He touched the coffee pot. 2 cups, Henry said, holding up the second cup Silas had poured for himself earlier but hadn't finished. You drinking for 2? Holloway? I drink a lot, Silas said. Henry walked to the corner. He saw the bear furs. He knelt down and picked something up. He turned to Silas, holding it up between his thumb and forefinger. It was a long, dark hair, much longer than Silas's, and it smelled of lavender soap. You have very pretty hair for a hermit, Henry whispered. The air in the cabin shifted. The tension snapped. Where are they? Henry roared, drawing his Colt peacemaker. Silas didn't answer. He looked at the 5 men. He calculated the angles. He was fast, but not that fast. I told you, Silas said steadily. I never had a wife, and I don't have your fugitives. Liar! Henry pistol-whipped Silas across the face. Silas stumbled back, tasting blood. He didn't fall. He straightened up, spitting a glob of red onto the floor. Check the barn! Henry barked at his deputies. Check the ridges! If they are here, we find them. And then he turned the gun on Silas. We hang this traitor from his own roof beam. As the deputies scrambled out, Silas met Henry's gaze. He realized then that Clara was right. This wasn't a man of the law. This was a man of vengeance. And Silas Holloway, who had spent 20 years running from his own ghosts, was about to become one. He just hoped Clara and Marianne were running fast enough, because the lonely mountain man couldn't hold this line forever. Pain was a color, and for Silas Holloway, that color was white. He woke to the sensation of being dragged. His wrists were bound with rawhide that bit into his skin, and a rope was lashed around his waist, the other end tied to the saddle horn of Henry's horse. The sheriff was forcing him to walk through the deep drifts, stumbling and falling, used as a human plow to break the trail. Get up, Holloway! Henry shouted, jerking the rope. Silas scrambled to his feet, gasping. His face was a mask of bruised purple and dried blood where the pistol had struck him. His ribs burned with every breath, likely cracked from a boot to the chest while he was down. They were moving up the slope, toward the tree line, toward the cave. We found the tracks. Old man, the weasel-faced deputy, whose name was Vance, sneered from his horse. They tried to step on rocks, but a woman in a hurry always slips. Found a piece of fabric on a briar. He held up a scrap of blue calico. Marianne's dress. Silas spat blood into the snow. He calculated. There were 5 armed men on horses. He was one battered man on foot, unarmed. But they were in his cathedral now. The air was thin up here, barely enough to feed the lungs of flatlanders. The snow concealed treacherous footing, crevasses, loose scree, hollow pockets of air. You'll never catch them, Silas rasped. They know these mountains better than you think. They're city mice, Henry laughed, a sound like grinding stones. And you're leading us right to them. If you don't, I drag you until there's no skin left on your bones." They reached the edge of the dense pine forest. The horses grew nervous, sensing the uneven ground and the sheer drop of the ravine to their left. The Devil's Throat. It was a 300-foot plunge into icy rapids that never froze completely, churning with violent energy. "Dismount," Henry ordered. "Too steep for the horses. Tie them here. We walk." The men grumbled but obeyed. They tied the horses to the pines. Henry kept the rope around Silas's waist, holding the end in his gloved fist. "Lead the way. Holloway. Where does this game trail go?" "Goes to the devil," Silas muttered. "Walk!" Henry shoved him. Silas walked. He saw the subtle signs the women had left. A broken twig here, a scuffed rock there. They were moving fast, but they were tiring. He had to act. He led them along the rim of the Devil's Throat. The path was narrow, a shelf of rock covered in ice and dusted with fresh powder. "Careful here," Silas warned, his voice deceptively helpful. "It's slippery." "Just move," Vance said, poking Silas in the back with his rifle barrel. Silas waited for the right spot. There was a section of the trail where the rock jutted out over the abyss, supported by an ancient, rotting root system that the snow hid perfectly. Silas knew exactly where the solid rock ended and the false shelf began. He stepped carefully, placing his feet on the true stone. "Hurry up!" Henry yanked the rope. Silas stumbled on purpose, falling to his knees. "I can't! I'm done! Get up!" Henry stepped forward to kick him, pulling the other deputies with him into a cluster. Silas looked up, his eyes burning with a sudden, feral intensity. "I told you. I never had a wife. Because I couldn't save her from men like you." "What?" Henry frowned. Silas rolled. He rolled toward the edge, not away from it. He threw his body weight off the solid rock and into the void. "Hold him!" Henry screamed, bracing his feet. The rope went taut. Silas dangled over the precipice, the wind roaring in his ears. His weight jerked Henry forward. The sheriff stumbled onto the false shelf. Crack. The rotting roots gave way. The snow shelf collapsed. With a scream that was swallowed by the wind, the ground beneath Henry and Vance gave way. Vance fell silently, tumbling into the white mist of the gorge. Henry flailed, grabbing at the edge of the solid rock, his legs dangling over nothing. The rope around Silas's waist was the only thing keeping Henry from falling to his death, but it was also strangling Silas, pinning him against the rock face 10 feet down. "Pull me up!" Henry shrieked at the remaining 3 deputies who were clinging to the trees, terrified. "Cut the rope!" Silas roared from below. He grabbed the knife he had hidden in his boot, a small skinning blade they hadn't found because they hadn't checked the inside of his high-topped moccasins. He didn't cut the rope to save himself. He slashed at the rawhide binding his wrists. "Shoot him!" Henry yelled, his face purple with exertion as he tried to haul himself up. A deputy leaned over the edge, aiming his revolver. Silas freed his hands. He grabbed the rope that connected him to Henry. He didn't climb it. He wrapped it around his arm and yanked downwards with all his strength. Gravity and momentum did the rest. Henry's grip on the icy rock failed. He slid backward. "No!" Henry fell past Silas, his eyes wide with disbelief. But the rope was still tied to Silas's waist. As Henry plummeted, the slack ran out. The jerk would snap Silas's spine or tear him off the wall. Silas slashed the rope at his waist with the knife. Snap. The tension released instantly. Henry fell, screaming, vanishing into the fog of the Devil's Throat. A few seconds later, there was no sound but the rushing water far below. Silas was left clinging to a scrub bush growing out of the cliff face, shaking, freezing, and alone. Above him, 3 deputies were regrouping. "He's dead!" one shouted. "They're both dead!" "No," another said. "I see Holloway. He's on the ledge." Silas didn't wait. He scrambled sideways, moving like a spider across the rock face, finding handholds that shouldn't exist. He swung himself into a fissure in the rock, a narrow chimney that led up and away from the trail, emerging into the dense timber 50 yards uphill. He crawled out of the fissure, collapsing into the snow. He was free. But he was unarmed, save for a small knife, and there were 3 men with rifles between him and the women. He forced himself up. The pain was gone, replaced by a cold, mechanical drive. He was the mountain now. and the mountain had teeth. Clara held the Colt Navy revolver with both hands, the barrel shaking uncontrollably. They were huddled in the back of the shallow cave. The thermal vent provided a damp, sulfuric warmth, but it did nothing to melt the ice in her veins. "Did you hear that scream?" Marianne whispered, clutching a jagged rock. "Yes," Clara said. "It was a man. Was it Silas?" "I don't know." Clara checked the cylinder. 2 bullets. That was all Silas had left in the gun he'd given them. 1 for the first man through the entrance. 1 for. She looked at Marianne. She wouldn't let them take her sister back. Not alive. Outside, the wind carried voices. "Check the cave." He must have circled back. "I ain't going in there. It's dark. Henry is dead. You idiot. If we don't bring these women back, the judge will hang us for incompetence. Get in there." Footsteps crunched on the stone entry. A shadow fell across the light. Clara raised the gun. "Not 1 step closer!" The shadow stopped. It was a deputy, a tall man with a scar. He laughed. "Well, now." "There you are, darling. Put the toy down. You know you won't shoot. I killed a man to save her," Clara said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I'll kill another. You got 1 shot, maybe," the deputy sneered, stepping forward. "Then I got 5. Click." The sound of a hammer cocking came from behind the deputy, outside the cave. "Drop it," a voice growled, a voice like grinding gravel. The deputy spun around. Silas stood there. He looked like a revenant. His clothes were torn. His face was a mask of dried blood, and in his hands he held a heavy branch he had fashioned into a club. But it wasn't the club that scared the deputy. It was the look in his eyes. It was the look of a man who had already died and had nothing left to lose. "Holloway?" the deputy stammered. "You fell." "I climbed back out," Silas said. "Where are the others? Looking for the horses. I'm alone. Liar." 2 shots rang out from the trees. Bullets chipped the stone inches from Silas's head. He dove into the cave, rolling over his shoulder and coming up beside Clara. "Give me the gun," Silas demanded. Clara handed it to him without hesitation. 2 rounds. 2 is enough, Silas said. He looked at them. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Silas, your face." Marianne reached out. "Later." Silas crouched by the cave entrance, using the rock as cover. "They have rifles. They'll pin us down until dark, then rush us." "What do we do?" Clara asked. Silas looked at the terrain outside. The cave opened onto a small plateau. To the right was a steep rise. To the left, the drop-off. "I draw their fire," Silas said calmly. "You run for the ridge. Once you're over the crest, you slide down the other side. It leads back to the cabin." "We aren't leaving you!" Clara yelled. "You don't have a choice!" Silas snapped. He turned to look at her, and for a moment, the hardness in his face softened. "Abigail didn't run. She stayed to help me fight off claim jumpers 20 years ago. A stray bullet took her. I buried her in the back. I won't bury another woman, Clara. Not today." Clara stared at him, the realization hitting her. The AH in the book. The solitude. The anger. It was all grief. Petrified, frozen grief. "Silas! Go!" Silas roared. He broke cover, sprinting not toward the ridge, but straight at the gunmen in the trees. He moved in a zigzag pattern, screaming a war cry that echoed off the peaks. "He's crazy!" a deputy yelled. Shots erupted. Dust kicked up around Silas's feet. He fired 1 shot from the revolver. Bang! And a deputy in the trees cried out, clutching his shoulder. 1 bullet left. Silas dove behind a fallen log. He was pinned. The remaining 2 deputies, the wounded one and the one from the cave entrance, were flanking him. Clara grabbed Marianne. "Run!" They scrambled up the ridge, slipping and clawing at the frozen earth. "Get the girls!" the tall deputy shouted, abandoning Silas to chase the women. Silas saw him move. He stood up from behind the log, exposing himself completely. He leveled the Colt Navy. He took a breath, steadying his hand despite the adrenaline and the cold. He thought of Abigail. He thought of the empty cabin. He thought of the biscuits Clara had made. Bang! The shot took the pursuing deputy in the back of the leg. He went down, screaming. But the third man, the one Silas hadn't seen clearly, stepped out from behind a pine tree, leveling a Winchester at Silas's chest. "End of the road, mountain man," the deputy grinned. Silas clicked the trigger. Empty. He dropped the gun. He stood tall. He didn't flinch. Make it count. The deputy squeezed the trigger. Crack. The sound was thunderous. But Silas didn't fall. The deputy's head snapped back, a bloom of red appearing on his forehead. He crumpled to the snow, dead before he hit the ground. Silas stood there, blinking, confused. He looked up toward the ridge. Clara stood at the crest. Smoke drifted from the barrel of a rifle she held. Silas's Winchester, which he had left in the scabbard on his saddle, and which the deputies had foolishly left on the horses tied near the ridge. She had circled back. She had retrieved the weapon. And she had made the shot of a lifetime. Silas's knees gave out. He sat down hard in the snow. Clara and Marianne came sliding down the slope. Clara dropped the rifle and ran to him, throwing her arms around his neck. She was sobbing, fierce, racking sobs. "You didn't run," Silas whispered, his voice full of wonder. "I told you." Clara pulled back, her face streaked with tears and gunpowder. "We are partners. Partners don't run." Silas looked at the dead men in the snow. Then he looked at the women. For the first time in 20 years, the cold inside his chest began to recede. The spring of 1889 came late to the Bitterroot Range, but when it arrived, it was glorious. The valley exploded in wildflowers. Indian paintbrush, lupine, and arrowleaf balsam root painting the slopes in red, purple, and yellow. The cabin still stood, though it looked different now. There were curtains in the windows, made from repurposed flour sacks dyed with berry juice. A small garden had been tilled on the south side, where green shoots of peas and carrots were poking through the dark earth. Silas sat on the porch, whittling a piece of cedar. His shoulders still stiffened up when it rained, and he walked with a slight hitch in his step, but he looked younger. The gray in his beard was trimmed, and his shirt was mended with neat, almost invisible stitches. The door opened, and Marianne stepped out, holding a sketchbook. She sat on the steps, sketching the grandeur of the Tetons. She no longer jumped at loud noises. The mountain air had put color in her cheeks and steel in her spine. "The mule is loose again," Clara called out from inside. Silas chuckled. "Bess is just looking for the sweet grass." Clara came out, wiping her hands on an apron. She stood behind Silas, resting a hand on his shoulder. It was a casual intimacy, one earned through blood and winter. They hadn't left. When the snow melted, they had discussed it. The sheriff was dead, and with him, the immediate threat. The deputies who died in the snow were written off as casualties of the blizzard, foolish flatlanders who got lost. No one came looking for Holloway or the widows. The West was vast, and it was good at keeping secrets. "We could go to Oregon," Clara had said back in April. "You could," Silas had replied, looking at his boots. "Do you want us to go?" Silas had looked at the empty space where he used to sit alone, staring at the ghosts. Then he looked at the warmth they had filled it with. "No," he had said, "I don't." Now, watching the sun dip behind the peaks, turning the sky into a bruise of purple and gold, Silas felt a sense of peace he hadn't known was possible. He reached up and covered Clara's hand with his own rough palm. "You know," Silas said softly, "I told you a lie that first night." "Oh," Clara smiled, looking down at him. "Which one? I said I never had a wife." Clara squeezed his shoulder. "I know about Abigail, Silas. You don't have to explain." "No," Silas shook his head. "That's not what I mean. I said it like I was empty, like I was finished." He looked at Marianne sketching, and then up at Clara's green eyes, which reflected the mountains he loved. "I never had a wife," Silas corrected himself, his voice thick with emotion. "But I have a family now, and that's worth more than all the gold in California." Clara bent down and kissed his forehead, right on the scar left by the years of frowning. "Yes, Silas," she whispered. "You do." The wind blew through the pines, but it no longer screamed. It sang. It was a song of survival, of second chances, and of the love that blooms even in the deepest snow. The lonely mountain man was lonely no more. And so, the snow melted, but the bond forged in that cabin was stronger than iron. Silas Holloway, Clara, and Marianne found something rare in the unforgiving West: redemption. They proved that no matter how deep the drifts of your past may be, You can always dig your way out if you have someone to hold the shovel with you. If this story warmed your heart or kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It helps us tell more stories like this. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a journey into the Wild West. And tell me in the comments, would you have opened the door that night? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next trail.